Chapter 4, The Economics of Education, Measuring the Return on Learning. 1. The Spreadsheet Epiphany. When economist Clara Sue joined Canada's Treasury Board in 2019, her assignment was to analyze subsidy efficiency. Her first surprise came from a simple comparison. Over the previous decade, federal support for oil extraction had produced a return of roughly $1.30 per public dollar invested. Large-scale infrastructure averaged $1.90. Education spending, however, especially early childhood and digital training programs, yielded $4 to $7 for every public dollar. She stared at the spreadsheet, adjusted for inflation, and ran it again. The numbers refused to move. The most profitable thing a country could buy, it seemed, was a smarter population. 2. The hidden engine of every revolution. Every major leap in productivity followed a leap in literacy. The Industrial Revolution began not with steam engines but with cheap pamphlets that taught mechanics to tinker. The post-war economic boom coincided with the GI Bill in the US and expanded secondary schooling across the Commonwealth. The digital revolution erupted only after mass university education produced programmers and network engineers. Economist Robert Lucas, awarded the Nobel Prize for Growth Theory, concluded that knowledge spillovers, the diffusion of skills and ideas between people, account for much of long-term GDP growth that capital alone cannot explain. Education is not a social service, it's the oxygen of innovation. 3. Micro-returns, the personal dividend. At the individual level, the pattern is constant across time and geography. Each additional year of schooling raises lifetime earnings by 8 to 10%. University graduates in Canada earn on average $1.4 million more over a career than those without post-secondary credentials. Adults who participate in continuing education are 30% less likely to experience long-term unemployment. Education also produces non-monetary dividends, lower crime rates, longer life expectancy, and higher reported well-being. Economists call these externalities. In reality, they're the compound interest of curiosity. 4. Macro returns, the national dividend. For nations, learning works like infrastructure but compounds faster. According to the OECD, raising average literacy by one competency level, out of 5, adds 2.5% to labor productivity and 1.5% to GDP. The World Bank's Human Capital Index ranks countries by how much of a child's potential productivity is realized through health and education. Canada scores 0.80, strong but short of the leaders, Finland, Singapore, South Korea. Each tenth of a point gained would add roughly $150 billion in long-term output. Investment in education thus behaves like a perpetual bond, it never matures, it only appreciates. 5. The cost of ignorance. If the return is so clear, why isn't every government doubling down? Because the losses are invisible. A factory closure is headline news, a generation of undertrained citizens is a slow leak. Yet the Conference Board of Canada estimates that skill mismatches and low adult literacy cost the economy $80 to $100 billion annually in lost productivity. That's twice the annual federal deficit. Failure to educate is the most expensive austerity policy imaginable. 6. Health, crime, and civic ROI. Education reduces costs far beyond the classroom. Every additional year of schooling lowers the likelihood of chronic disease by about 6%. A population with higher literacy has lower incarceration rates. In the US, 75% of prisoners read below a high school level. Higher education correlates with higher voter turnout, stronger community engagement, and greater trust in institutions, social stability with measurable fiscal value. The Institute for Fiscal Studies, UK, calculates that these side effects add another $2-3 return per dollar invested, even without counting wage gains. Learning saves as much as it earns. 7. From human capital to human capability. Traditional economics frames education as human capital, a factor of production like land or machinery. Nobel laureate Amartya Sen proposed a more humane lens, the capability approach. Education expands what people can be and do, their range of meaningful choices. Freedom, in this sense, is an economic resource. Sen's insight reframes efficiency. The goal isn't simply higher GDP but broader capability distribution. A nation that maximizes both growth and choice becomes resilient against automation and inequality alike. 8. Automation and the new skill frontier. The World Economic Forum projects that automation could displace 85 million jobs worldwide by 2030 but create 97 million new ones, mostly requiring digital, analytical, and social-emotional skills. Education is the bridge between those numbers. Canada's Future Skills Centre estimates that half of today's jobs will require significant retraining within a decade. Traditional universities cannot scale that fast. An open, gamified federal platform could, offering modular credentials, microcourses, and peer mentoring at negligible marginal cost. This isn't speculation. Finland's Elements of AI course has trained more than 1% of its population online for free. Scale that to Canada, and the productivity impact would rival a major resource discovery. 9. The fiscal argument for openness. Private education markets capture only a fraction of learning's value. When one person gains knowledge, everyone around them benefits. That's the textbook definition of a public good, non-rivalrous and broadly beneficial. Public funding corrects that market failure. A federal open education platform multiplies the effect: low administrative overhead, reusable content, and continuous reach. Estimates from UNESCO's open learning pilots show cost per learner under $25 when scaled nationally. Compare that with thousands in annual tuition or retraining subsidies. The math borders on miraculous. 10. International benchmarks. South Korea spends 7% of GDP on education and boasts one of the world's fastest innovation cycles. Finland made teacher training free and universally accessible, then topped global literacy rankings. Singapore gives every adult learning credits, proof that lifelong education can be policy, not slogan. All three transformed limited natural resources into intellectual wealth. Canada, with greater fiscal capacity and connectivity, could surpass them by unifying provincial systems through a federal open platform. 11. Education versus subsidy, the comparative ROI. Consider Canada's annual corporate subsidies, roughly $30 to $40 billion across industries. Even modest reallocation could finance a national open learning initiative. $5 billion annually could host free courses for every citizen and support local content creators. The productivity gain, 3 to 4% GDP over a decade, would generate tax revenue exceeding the initial cost. In accounting terms, that's a positive feedback loop, a self-financing investment rather than expenditure. 12. The multiplier of trust. Education's greatest economic effect may be psychological. Populations that believe competence matters more than birth produce higher entrepreneurship rates and lower corruption. The World Values Survey links educational equality with public trust. Each rise in average years of schooling predicts a measurable drop in perceived corruption indices. Trust reduces transaction costs. Every contract, every regulation, every lawsuit avoided is GDP regained. Learning creates not only workers but believers in fairness, the lubricant of markets. 13. The platform multiplier. Digitally delivered education compounds these returns by collapsing cost per user. Once content is produced, each new learner approaches zero marginal cost. Add gamification and social incentives, and engagement rises exponentially. The Duolingo model, game-based microlearning, boasts 500 million users with minimal advertising. If a federal platform achieved even 25% national participation, the aggregate skill uplift would add the equivalent of a second natural resource boom, without environmental cost. 14. The long view. Economist James Heckman demonstrated that early childhood education yields annualized returns of 7 to 10%, surpassing most financial investments. The same compounding logic applies to adult education. The earlier and broader the investment, the higher the yield. In the long run, education behaves like climate policy, expensive to neglect, transformative when pursued. It amortizes fairness over generations. 15. Closing argument. Back at her spreadsheet, Clara Sue added a final column: intangible returns. Next to tax revenue and employment growth, she listed words economists seldom type: resilience, dignity, hope. They have no market price, yet every thriving market depends on them. The numbers still aligned. Education was the most efficient machine for turning public money into public strength. What roads and railways were to the 19th century, open knowledge will be to the 21st. A federally funded open education platform is not a cost center, It's civilization's best investment vehicle, interest-bearing, inflation-proof, morally sound. And unlike every other asset, it only grows when given away. End of Chapter 4, The Economics of Education.